It is a bright sunny morning, August the 7th, in the hills of California, where I often come for prayer, to hear from the Lord. And over the past few days, God has been speaking to me regarding Joshua and the conquest of the land on the other side of the Jordan, and I think I'm ready to make a little video about that. Just to set the stage, the stories we all know. Moses leads the people through the wilderness, delivers from Egypt, leads the people through the wilderness, and at one point sends out a number of spies, 12 spies, into the land that God had promised to be the possession of the people of Israel. And amongst those were Joshua and Caleb, the only ones that came back with a report of, yeah, there's giants in the land, but God is certainly able to overcome. The others counseled rebellion. And they said, Moses, you've taken us out here to die, and our children are going to die in the wilderness, and there's no hope for us. And this sparks a rebellion. This sparks Korah's rebellion, where Korah said, you've crossed the line here, Moses, and we stand against you, and the Lord has not chosen you. All the people are priests of God. And we see the story of the rebellion of Korah, the destruction of those who stood with Korah, and the vindication of Moses and his leadership. And Moses says at that time, he says, the children of Israel will wander in this wilderness 1 day, 1 year for every 1 day that you spied out the land and lacked faith. So 40 years in the wilderness. And then Moses says, not one person under 20 years old will enter the promised land, except for Joshua and Caleb. So this brand new generation, the grandchildren of those who were brought out of Egypt, are those now at the threshold of the Jordan under the leadership of Joshua. And there's a lot to the story, but the children of Israel cross over the Jordan, they recircumcise themselves, they re-celebrate the Passover, the first fruits of the land are theirs, the manna stops, and Joshua sees a man with a sword, goes to him and says, are you for us or are you against us? And the man says, I stand now as the captain of the Lord of hosts. The Lord of hosts. The angels of God, the captain of the angels of God. In other words, I stand here for the purposes of God, and the angels of heaven are standing with you. And Joshua says to the angel, what do you have to say to me? And the angel says, take off your shoes, because where you're standing is holy. The promised land is at hand. This land is holy unto the Lord, and we are going to work together. The captain of the Lord of hosts and the army of God will work together to realize the conquest of the land and the holiness of the Lord. And the first obstacle they confront, of course, is the massive walls of Jericho. And Jericho represents that which is at the threshold of the promises of God, which is thwarting the people of God. And so, again, we know the story of how the walls of Jericho come down with, a strategy of warfare. The first and only time in the history of warfare this strategy has been used, and the walls of Jericho fall down, and everything is completely destroyed in Jericho except for Rahab, the harlot, and her family was rescued. And so one of the things I take from that is that as now the spiritual warfare is beginning to peak, as the promises of God are in greater measure beginning to be realized, as the promised land is beginning now to be occupied by the people of God, we face these obstacles. And one of these great obstacles is Islam. Islam is a fortress at the threshold of Zion, at the threshold of the Jordan, which is opposed to the purposes of God, and God intends to bring it down and to destroy everything within it, claim its wealth for the people of God, and rescue from it families. Not important families, not sheikhs and the wealthy, but the despised in its midst. The weak and the humble in its midst will be rescued. Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee, Abraham said. And God said, yeah. And so the Ishmaels that are going to live before thee are the humble of Jericho that are rescued. And in this conquest, there will be many Rahabs, many families rescued from the cities, from the fortresses, many messengers of Saul that will join the prophets. And that is the plan and purpose of God. And so this occupation of the land is happening. It's happening through young people who did not experience Egypt, whose parents died in the wilderness because of lack of faith. And it is this young army led by the heir to the mantle of Moses, aided by the armies of God. And even the sun, as you read through the story, the sun itself is working with Joshua for the purposes of this conquest of the Promised Land. And for us, the Promised Land is the earth. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. These prior stories are stories in the natural, and we inherit them in the spirit. But I think it is true that those who have led the people up into the threshold of the Jordan are not going to be those who cross the Jordan and lead the people in the victory of Jesus. It will be the young people. It will be those whose unbelief is not, whose belief is not threatened by unbelief. And whatever the foibles of their parents are, they're the ones that are going to cross the Jordan. And the same kind of story is repeated with Elijah and Elisha. The mantle of Elijah falls on Elisha on the other side of the Jordan, by the way, on the non-promised land side of the Jordan. And we see in Elisha a greater victory over the house of Ahab, a greater victory over the worship of the Baals than Elisha encountered. Maybe not exactly as dramatic, but more thorough. And again, new leadership for a new pouring out of the Spirit of God, for a new day of greater victory. That is where we are.